Welcome, students, to the SIGcast on Mannerist art of the 15th and 16th centuries. Mannerist art, also referred to as the Late Renaissance, is a style of European art that emerged in the late years of the Italian Renaissance, around 1520 to 1530. It lasted till around the end of the 16th century, when it was replaced by the Baroque style. This was a painting known as Madonna with a long neck. I should say long neck and fingers. And if you're confused as to why it's called Madonna with a long neck and what that has to do with Mannerist style, you'll understand why Parmigianino painted this way and why this painting is a good representation of what defines the Mannerist style. You'll find that out here in the next few minutes. But first, a word from our sponsor. Speaking of Madonnas and mothers, how about some fall color in the form of, well, mums? Chrysanthemums, that is. Or maybe you need a tree. Signature Garden in Export, PA does not discriminate against any type of tree. You want a small tree? We got it. You need a skinny tree? We got that too. You want a tree that loses its leaves in the winter? Or maybe you want a tree that stays green all year round? We got it. You want a Mannerist style tree that's elongated and freestyling? Definitely have that many times over. Unique or plain, that's our game. Signature Gardens has all of your landscape needs and more. Check us out at signaturegardens.com. Well, boys and girls, I always tell you that art is a reflection of what is impacting society at the time. This era of art is no exception. Religious wars rocked Europe from 1500s into the 1600s, impacted both the Mannerist and the Baroque styles of art. The late 16th and early centuries were dominated, as we've studied, by brutal power conflicts for religion and control of the various states. Examples of this are in Germany, or the Holy Roman Empire, the Wars of the League of Schmalkalden, or the German religious wars in general, which concluded with the not-so-lasting Peace of Augsburg in 1555. In France, we had the War of the Three Henries and its St. Bart's Massacre in 1572, or, let's not forget, the 30 Years' War of 1618 to 1648. In France, the Netherlands, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, devastation, poverty, violence, and destruction had followed many of these religious conflicts. I mentioned Spain, I mentioned France, I mentioned Germany, but let's not forget the 80-year revolt in the Netherlands and the Duke of Alva and the Council of Blood under Philip II. All of this violence, chaos, and uncertainty, it had a profound impact on Europeans, and it was seen through their art. Painters and writers of the late 16th and early 17th would attempt to escape reality through their work, as well as answer new questions and seek new answers to old. The Renaissance paintings and art that we've covered up to this point were all about reality and figuring out perfection and how to paint or draw or sketch the human body. You had artists like Michelangelo and Da Vinci exhuming bodies to study them. You had Titian, let's not forget about Albrecht Dürer sketches and woodcuts. The people who followed these geniuses, these Ninja Turtles, well, they're kind of screwed if you think about it. I mean, how do you top Michelangelo? It's kind of like in football. The next QB that follows Tom Brady in New England? Oh my goodness. It happened here in Pittsburgh right after Terry Bradshaw retired for years. So, throwing the religious troubles and the controversy of the time, that's what you get. You get the Mannerist style. They were like the gangster rappers of their day. Wow, can't believe I just said that. So these painters and artists who followed the greats of the High Renaissance, many of them started to throw out all the rules and aim to create something totally new. You know, in their mind, perfection had already been reached. Now, their desire was to go beyond perfection. So this new style of art, known as Mannerism, represented artists and Europeans escaping reality. It rejected the balance, peace, harmony, and realistic accuracy of the Renaissance. Characteristics, you need to know these, included elongated figures with distortion. Painters like El Greco created unique and disturbing images, colors, and lightings, focusing on gloomy blue and gray themes. As I said, art is a reflection of what's going on in society. So the influence of this style of art is the violence and chaos of the unchristian conflicts plaguing Europe. Another trait is the many paintings are off-centered a bit. And again, an example of rebelling against the perfection of the High Renaissance. This style of painting and art was not just confined to painting and sketches. It also, in fact, it impacted writing. Writers like Michel de Montaigne, the father of the essay, wrote, essays, go figure, about understanding oneself and one's own morality rather than unstable religious topics. He continued the Renaissance theme of skepticism in his writings. And his style of writing, his skeptical style, caught on. Lucky you. Where you could actually have doubt or any theory of any kind of topic, socially, politically, religiously, and defend it with this new literary genre. And the LEQ and DBQ are born. Perhaps the greatest of the Mannerists, with his use of elongated figures and unnatural pigments that you should know, is El Greco, which means the Greek. Born Dominikos Theotokopoulos, which have no idea if I pronounced that right, but it sounded kind of good. The Greek is widely regarded as one of the foremost painters of the Spanish Renaissance. His paintings are renowned for their spiritual intensity and use of radically foreshortened, elongated figures, depicted in often brilliant, unnatural flesh tones. El Greco was originally trained in Crete as a Byzantine icon painter, but then he moved to Italy in the High Renaissance around 1567, where he studied with the Venetian Renaissance painters, Titian and Tintoretto. A decade later, he eventually found himself settling in Toledo, Spain, where he spent the rest of his life. This is a rendition of what he called the Portrait of an Old Man. In many of El Greco's paintings, you can see the uncertainty of the time going on in Spain. Again, dealing with the split in the church, bouts with the Inquisition, the Reformation, and just all-out war, whether it be against the Dutch, whether it be with England and the Spanish Armada, or being in the 1600s, the 30 Years' War. But you can also see the religious fervor in his paintings. So I want to share with you a few things about this painting that kind of make it interesting. This is the burial of the Count of Orgaz. And the painting is about a local legend. And this local legend would be familiar with the people of Toledo, Spain. And they loved and admired a guy named Don Gonzalo de Ruiz for his charitable life. And supposedly he remained generous in death. So supposedly, in death, in his will, he organized and made available funds from his Orgaz estate to go to this church. So as the story goes, it wasn't just a local who loved de Ruiz. It said when his body was buried in 1323, St. Stephen and St. Augustine came down from heaven to delicately lay him in his tomb. This painting that went up in this church in Toledo is enormous. The burial of Count of Orgaz measures over 15 feet by 11 feet. So this was a challenge for him to paint this in this amount of space. And he only had, if I remember correctly, about 9 months in which to paint this. But it's backed with biblical cameos. And at the top of the center is Jesus, and he's flanked by his relative, John the Baptist. And on the right, and his mother, the Virgin Mary, on the left. Over Mary's shoulder, in yellow robes sits St. Peter. Lazarus, rising from his grave, can be found on the far right, while the far left folds in David, Moses, and Noah. On earth, St. Stephen and St. Augustine are dressed in gold finery, lay the Count finally to rest. Both King Philip II and Pope Sixtus V make appearances. Both are placed in the upper section of the burial of the Count of Orgaz, signifying the Spanish king and pope are in heaven. Which is interesting because at the time of this painting, they were both still alive. Because this painting was finished in 1588, same year as the Spanish Armada. What's really cool about this painting, in my opinion, is that El Greco makes it a family portrait. In the painting, He contains images of both the artist and his son. And art historians believe that El Greco can be found in the front line of mourners, left of center. He's the one looking straight out of the painting at the viewer. You can see right here. His younger son, Jorge Manuel, can be spotted in the foreground with one hand on a long torch and the other gesturing towards the armored count. And that would be this little guy right here. Jorge had been identified by a clue found embroidered in his pocket square, and the year of his birth was 1578, so he'd be about 10 in this painting. But as you can see, with El Greco, he uses the Mannerist style of using different tones, fleshy tones, blue, gray tones. And as this Pieta in 1592 demonstrates, it's not perfect. There is the elongation that you can see. It's not in direct proportion. It's not perfect proportion. When you compare this to Michelangelo's sculpture of the Pieta, it's much different. El Greco, in the view of Toledo in 1600, interestingly enough, changed a lot of the locations of several buildings in Toledo, and proving that documentation was not the artist's primary concern. Rather, he is telling us what Toledo looked like. Here, he communicates what the city feels like. Toledo becomes the means through which the artist expresses his interior psychological state, and perhaps a view about the nature of man's relationship with the divine. As said earlier, El Greco typically uses dark and moody colors, and he does this in the view of Toledo. And he has the Spanish city at the top of a rolling hill. The city really only takes up a little bit of space in the center of the painting. It's really the landscape and the sky that dominate. And this isn't just any sky. If you look closely, El Greco's clouds are about to crack open and unleash a fiery storm on the city, perhaps. The buildings themselves seem to crawl across the painting, and curving lines throughout the hill give the impression that the vista is moving and that it actually might be alive. So in El Greco's view of Toledo, something's about to happen, and a lot of people feel that it's probably not going to be good. So this, again, could be signifying the dark days ahead for the Spanish. We know the golden age of Spain was golden, but it didn't last all that long. I hope this presentation has been good for you in terms of understanding what the Mannerist style was, and you have a few examples, mainly a couple examples through El Greco, who's considered the premier or the quintessential Mannerist style. So as long as you have a brief understanding of this on the AP exam, you're going to be good to go. So once again, thanks to our sponsors, and thanks